Hi guys, Olive here today to talk to you about my absolute favorite audiobooks. I think audiobooks are incredible. I think they are bringing books to more people. There are so many people out there who lead extremely hectic lives who don't have the time to sit down with a book. Then there are people with different physical capabilities. They may lack the ability to sit down with a book for one reason or another. And then there are simply people who have different styles of learning who learn best when they hear things spoken aloud. They learn best when they listen to things. Which includes me, by the way. I am a very auditory learner. I used to recite my notes aloud to myself as I was preparing for exams in college. Don't get me wrong, I love a physical book. I love sitting down with a book. I don't think that's ever going to change. But when I do listen to an audiobook, I get a ton out of them. And as the child of a special education teacher, I cannot tell you how happy it makes me that this format is out there and it's more accessible than ever. So more people with different physical capabilities, people with different learning styles, we can welcome all of these people into the wonderful world of books. But just like with physical books, audiobooks can definitely range in quality. As anyone who has listened to audiobooks in the past can tell you, the narrator sometimes makes all the difference, as can certain artistic choices. I've listened to quite a few audiobooks over the years, and I've developed this list of favorites that I'm going to be talking about today. And the ones in this list are ones that I think are something special when you listen to them on audio, where the narrator maybe takes the whole experience to the next level, sometimes because the author themselves is the narrator of the audiobook. And then sometimes I think these audiobooks are special because there's extra material provided in the audio version that you wouldn't get in the physical copy, or that wouldn't hit the same if you're just reading the content on the page. Those are the types of audiobooks I'll be talking about in this video. These are all ones where the audio version, I think, has something extra special to offer you as opposed to the physical book. They have that special something that the physical book just can't provide. And for each of them, I'll tell you what that is. But these are all audiobooks that really left an impression on me. Some of these I've listened to multiple times because I just can't get enough. And all of these are audiobooks where when I start thinking about the book, I can't help but hear the narrator's voice in my head. And that definitely applies to the first audiobook on my list, The Glorious Heresies by Lisa McInerney. Whenever I think back to this book, I can't help but hear the narrator, Shelley Atkinson's Irish accent in my head. The Glorious Heresies, it's a very gritty novel that follows a scrappy cast of interconnected characters in the decaying city of Cork, Ireland. An unexpected murder happens right at the start of the novel, and it ignites a chain reaction that spells nothing good for any of these characters. This book is darkly funny, completely unforgettable, extremely well written, which is why it won the Women's Prize back in 2016. And then Atkinson's narration is so present, so punchy. I think that hearing this novel in an Irish accent, it's not just the most authentic way to go. It really is the only way to go to have the best experience with this book. Although, listener beware, after I finished listening to this one, I mentally adopted the phrase boyo, and I had to stop myself from using it in real life because I'm not Irish, and my fellow Americans would not have appreciated it. What I also love about audiobooks is that you can have more than one narrator if the book has more than one character perspective, if it bounces back and forth between them. Sometimes you'll even see audiobooks that have a full cast to read for all the different characters, which, as a former theater kid, deeply satisfies me. Surprisingly, though, I only have one book on this list that has more than one narrator, and that's because this duo really brought the book to life for me. One of my favorite authors is Lily King, made a whole author spotlight on her not too long ago, but my favorite novel of hers is Euphoria. And the audiobook version of Euphoria, which is narrated by Simon Vance and Exie Sands, is something really special. Euphoria is a novel that was inspired by the life of the anthropologist Margaret Mead, specifically her relationships with two of her husbands. And as such, in this novel, we follow a trio of anthropologists who are studying in New Guinea back in the 1930s. A love triangle develops between the three of them before tragedy strikes. Simon Vance takes on the role of one of those men, while Exie Sands plays Nell, who is the Margaret Mead-like character. Both of those actors have done a ton of audiobook narration, so they are absolute pros. But specifically, there is one line that X.E. Sands delivers. It is such a beautiful passage from Lily King. It's one of the many reasons why I love her. But it's something about the way that X.E. Sands delivers that line that has made it stick in my brain. I have never forgotten it. I've never forgotten the way she said it. I think actually when I heard her say it, that was the moment I knew I loved this book. Now, you probably know the actor Bill Nye. Not like the science guy, the other Bill Nye. He has been in so many things, including very popular things like Pirates of the Caribbean. He was in the newest adaptation of Jane Austen's Emma. He was actually my favorite part of that movie, actually. Kind of made me change my mind about Emma, which I didn't think was possible. Anyway, when I heard that he narrated the audiobook for a book that I wanted to read, The Penguin Lessons by Tom Michel, I knew what format I was choosing. This is a memoir about how the author accidentally adopted a Magellanic penguin back in the 1970s. He was on his way to Argentina to be a teacher when he found this little penguin and it wouldn't leave his side. This book is endearing. It's funny. It was one of my favorite nonfiction books of last year. But when I tell you that Bill Nye nailed this narration, I mean that he absolutely crushed it. His naturally dry delivery suits this book perfectly. The voices he does are spot on. I mean, he took an already amazing book and shot its quality into the stratosphere. When I was talking at the start of this video about how an audiobook narrator can elevate the experience, I chiefly had this one in mind. I also adore the way that Richmond Hoxie performed The Unbearable Lightness of Being by Milan Kundera, which is one of my favorite classics. How to explain this book? It is a highly philosophical Czech novel, more philosophy than novel, if I'm being honest. But we focus on two different couples as they grapple with the Soviet occupation of Prague. It talks about their own views on life and then how they bring those views into their relationships. This is so much more of an experience than it is a novel, and then the audiobook makes it even more that way. You can feel how much the narrator, Richmond Hoxie, understands Kundera's work. From the looks of it, I think he's done the narration for every single Kundera book, so he has a lot of experience with it. You can just feel that he truly gets what Kundera is trying to say. And because of that, he has this presence within the audiobook. He really commands your attention. But then at the exact same time, especially during the more philosophical sections, there's this ethereal, dreamy quality to the narration that almost feels like you're in a trance when you're listening to the audiobook. It's kind of an unexplainable thing. You'll just have to experience it for yourself. I often feel the pull to reread this book, and every single time I do, I crave this audiobook. But that leads me into two audiobooks that I visit again and again and again, like clockwork. Every other December, I crave a reread of Bridget Jones's Diary by Helen Fielding, but specifically the audiobook version narrated by Barbara Rosenblatt. I am sure you know this book. It is a classic of the so-called chick lit genre. It is a very loose retelling of Pride and Prejudice, and in it we follow a 30-something emotional train wreck named Bridget Jones. I love this book, but I have to say I think I love the audiobook even more. Barbara Rosenblatt perfectly captures the lovably unhinged Bridget, but where I think she excels even more is the sing-songy way she portrays Bridget's mother, who was an incredibly important character in this book, far more important than she is in the movie adaptation, which I also love, by the way. I just re-listened to this one over the Christmas season, and it never disappoints. And I can say the same thing about the next one on my list, because it's the audio version of my favorite book of all time, Rules of Civility by Amor Towles, exquisitely narrated by Rebecca Loman. I reread this book every single June. I've done so for nearly a decade now. I've read the paperback, I've read the hardcover, but I think my favorite way to revisit this one is with the audiobook, because Rebecca Loman's voice just exudes the essence of this novel. I feel like I've talked about this book approximately 250,000 times here on my channel because it is my very favorite. Of course, I talk about it a lot, but just in case you don't know what this book is about, this book is essentially an older version of our main character, Katie Content, looking back at one calendar year of her life in the 1930s and seeing how much that year set the course for the rest of her life. It is a beautiful book. It gets better with every single reread. I can tell you, I get something different out of this book every single year. And it is just such a treat to hear Rebecca Loman bring these characters that I know and love to life. The next few audiobooks I'm going to speak about, I consider really special because the author does the narration. I personally love when authors narrate their own memoirs. Now, it doesn't always mean that the audiobook is guaranteed to be quality. I think good writers aren't always necessarily the best performers. So it's not just a given that it's going to be wonderful, but I find that most times when an author is telling their own life story, it brings an authenticity to the listening experience that no other actor could possibly bring because it's not their story. The quintessential example of this, in my opinion, is Lab Girl by Hope Jahren, which is the memoir of a plant scientist. Of course, she discusses her work in here, all of the challenges and rewards, but she also talks about a lot of her own life struggles. She's a beautiful writer, so the book is touching just right off the bat. But then her voice, hearing her voice, which is so gentle, so soothing, and then she also gets choked up while she's talking about harder things that have happened to her. Listening to this audiobook felt like you were in a room with her, like she was physically right across from you, telling you personally her entire life story. I loved it. The magician Joshua Jay also narrates his audiobook, How Magicians Think, which is a collection of a large number of mini essays that are all about what it means to be a professional magician and all the creativity involved in crafting a magical experience for an audience. It's a fantastic book. It was another one of my nonfiction favorites of last year, but then the fact that the author himself in the audiobook is describing things, he can choose what tone to take. He can choose what to emphasize as he's trying to get us as the audience to understand things, which I am sure helped bring his points across so much clearer to me as I was listening to this. He has a really nice voice, so it actually has a little bit of a podcast feel to it. And something that also kind of made it feel like a podcast is that you'd get this occasional burst of music in between the essays, kind of like you would get in between tricks during a magic show. So that lended a lot to the listening experience. But that leads me into my next favorite audiobook, which is not only narrated by the author, but it also includes additional material, things you would not get if you just picked up the physical book. Heartbreak by Florence Williams is a really special audiobook. It is unlike any other audiobook I have ever listened to. The book itself is a combination of memoir and science. The author is talking about her experience going through a divorce. But while she was going through that, she was also doing a ton of research on heartbreak, the science of it, its psychological and physiological impacts. It's all fascinating stuff, and stuff that I would have enjoyed regardless of the format that I read this book in. But what makes the audiobook special is that you get to hear voice recordings of this author's voice diary as she was going through some of the experiences that are detailed in the memoir portion, but then you also get to hear recordings of conversations that this author has with her friends and family, but then also with the scientists who she interviewed for those science-based parts of this book. You get to put their voices to the names that you're hearing throughout the book. It's something so special. It's just a really unique and fresh take on an audiobook, and I really hope it catches on. But the last book on this list of audiobook favorites is another one that includes a little bit of extra something. It's Mary Jane by Jessica Anya Blau. The audiobook is narrated by Caitlin Kinnan. And this is an absolutely charming novel about a teen girl in the 1970s who takes a summer job babysitting a little girl for a family, but for specific reasons, the parents of that little girl have two famous celebrity guests staying with them for the short term. And the group of them, including our main character, the teen girl, they form this little family for that period of time. Caitlin Kinnan does a great job with the narration of this audiobook. I think she has a very youthful voice that really suits the story. I think she was very well casted, but she's not actually the thing that I think makes this audiobook so remarkable. The real extraordinary thing about this audiobook is something that happens after the book is over. It's almost like an audio footnote. One of the famous guests that I mentioned earlier is a musician, and there's a part in the novel where he writes a song for our main character, Mary Jane. I didn't listen to the audiobook for Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. I hear it was great, but I was sent an ARC, so I read a physical copy. But I remember hearing that although people liked the audiobook, they were let down that they didn't get to hear some of the music that was talked about in that book, that was created by the fictional band in the book. We didn't get to hear any of those songs until the TV series adaptation came along, and even then, those songs were great, but they were different than what was in the book. Well, I'm assuming the producers of this audiobook must have been paying attention to some of those critiques, because at the very end of this audiobook, we get to hear the song that was written for Mary Jane. It is the same lyrics. It is the song talked about in the book. I already loved this book as I was going through it, but then to conclude the entire experience by getting to hear that song brought me so much joy. I mean, that alone is worth listening to the audiobook for. Those are the audiobooks that I personally cherish the most, but I would love to hear from you. What are your favorite audiobooks? Tell me what the book is, maybe who the narrator is, why you thought it was so special. I would love to add to my list of audiobooks to listen to. I could really use some more great listening experiences like the ones on this list. So let me know those things down in the comments. All the audiobooks that I did mention today will be listed and linked for you in the description box below for your clicking convenience. And at the very bottom of the exact same description box, you'll also see links to everywhere you can find me around the internet. Goodreads, Instagram, the Story Graph, all the places I'm the most active, in case you want to keep up with what I'm reading and doing right now. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I'll see you in the next video. Bye.